we're joined by Mr. Paul Goble. Thank you very much for joining our program. Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
for having me.
So the events in Kazakhstan are unfolding pretty fast. What is going on? What is your take on these events? How would you characterize what's going on in the streets of Kazakhstan?
I think that the increasing difficulties that the population is suffering, rising prices, wages that are more or less frozen, when they can see that members of the elite are enriching themselves in ever more rapid ways, finally got to the point that something snapped and that you got people going into the street. The most difficult part of these developments is when the first person decides to go. Once one does, others follow. And we've seen this spread from the major cities of Nur Sultan and Almaty up to the ethnic Russian north. It's now across the entire country. And I think that many people in Kazakhstan, ethnic Kazakhs and ethnic Russians alike, expected things to improve, expected a slight liberalization with the appearance of the new president, Tokayev. When it didn't happen, finally people had enough. And I think that was, I think probably there was some place where where the stores had empty shelves or where the prices suddenly doubled. And that was enough to start the ball rolling. And now we have something approaching a revolutionary situation. Clearly, the streets are in control. Those in power are struggling to maintain their positions, at least nominally. And I think that this is likely to go on for a few more days. Whether Tokayev can hold things together, I don't know. But clearly, this is a warning to a variety of other countries in the region that just because the governments using repressive means have been able to keep things quiet for a very long time does not mean that all of a sudden there can be a revolutionary upsurge which can sweep things away. And of course, because of those consequences, all kinds of people are going to be interested in getting this solved quickly, including the possibility of Russian intervention. There have been talk in the commentariat in Moscow about seizing the northern third of Kazakhstan, which is predominantly ethnic Russian, of introducing Russian forces to solidify the regime. I don't think those are likely possibilities, but the fact that they're being talked about shows how seriously people in the Russian capital are taking the events.
The official Russian reaction was that we're just following the events, that we won't comment. But at the same time, we hear that accusations that these events unfolding in Kazakhstan are being orchestrated by Ukraine. Does it surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me that Russians would make that claim. The Russian government has such contempt for ordinary people that it always has to find some security agency or network of spies behind everything that happens, and they blame those people regardless of what the facts are. This could not have been orchestrated by Ukraine, even if Ukraine had wanted to. This happened because the Kazakh people wanted it to happen. And the fact that Russia is saying that is simply a holding action. I think it has no more value of indicating what's really going on than Russia saying it's observing what is taking place. We're all observing what is taking place, and the changes may go off in one of several directions, both in Kazakhstan and then with regard to what will happen in terms of possible expansion of Russian military aggression against Ukraine. On the one hand, what's happening in Kazakhstan could lead to a delay of Russian moves. There's certainly been speculation on that point in Moscow and in Western Europe, and I think that's one possibility. The other possibility, of course, is that what's going on in Kazakhstan may lead some in Moscow to believe that this will provide them with a kind of cover, a distraction, if you will. The West's attention will be divided, and that this is a perfect time to move. And moreover, it would be a time for Moscow to demonstrate that hard power, military force, can achieve things against the will of the people and maintain the people Moscow wants in power far more effectively than any other way, from the Kremlin's point of view.
What's next for the current political elite government of Kazakhstan? What choices do they have, do you think?
Well, I think the fact that Tokayev has now moved to take complete control and that Nazarbayev has been removed from his last real power position almost certainly means that there will be a reordering of the elite. Many of the people who had been sitting on the fence trying to be both Nazarbayev supporters and Tokayev supporters now have to make a clear choice. Some of them will be able to. Some of them that may have been part of the Nazarbayev team will make the decision to go over to Tokayev and will be able to do so. Tokayev simply needs a lot of those people. On the other hand, there are likely to be a lot of people who will be pushed out and who will be forced either to leave the country or who will become a domestic opposition that Tokayev will have to deal with, and a domestic opposition that probably would be willing to try to use the street against Tokayev and his new government. And you could see a massive flight. You're already seeing business people, rich business people from Kazakhstan leaving. We've got reports that they're flying out in private jets, although now that some of the airports have been seized by the population, how many more can do that remains very much to be seen. The private jets have the great advantage, of course, that most of them are smaller and can land and take off at smaller airports. So if the airports at Nur Sultan and Almaty are in fact in the hands of the street, as it were, then people can move their planes or use planes off of smaller airplanes or offers out of smaller airports in the northern or western portions of the country. And there's also the possibility that some of these people will simply go over the border into Uzbekistan to Tashkent and fly out from there. So I would expect to see a reordering of the elite, and in the next days or weeks, a completely new set of personalities in the government. Whether that will end things, whether that will create a new stability, depends just how much Tokayev is able to mobilize the majority of the population against those who are in the streets in the major cities, and whether he will have the opportunity to do that. Because, as I say, we have evidence that the protests are spreading across Kazakhstan into ethnic Russian areas and also into the western portions of the country, which have been very much sources of unrest, economic unrest, labor union unrest over the past several years. To the extent that that's true, and again, the information is getting harder to get because the Kazakh government has shut down the internet. The news locally, we're more dependent on outside observers than is a good thing. We can't say yet whether that will constitute a move from a street protest to a political revolution. And it could be more than just a simple displacement of the Tokayev government, and it could lead to a wholesale transformation. And there are a number of different ways that could go, depending on who's involved, what order, and what outside forces, including the Russian Federation, do. One of the things we have not yet seen, and that's a big question mark, is we have not seen evidence that members of the Kazakh military and security community have gone over to the people in the street. If that starts, if military units start declaring for the opposition, then we're talking about a revolutionary situation that will come to fruition in the matter of hours and at most days.
Who are the leaders of the people in the streets?
Well, one of the things you have, there are a large number of people, I suspect, and this is speculative because we simply don't know enough yet. I suspect a lot of these people are local government officials and also who are upset with, like the people, with the economic inequalities, and the labor union leaders. The labor union leaders who led the strikes in Western Kazakhstan over the last 3 years certainly are involved. And I think that what you see when you have violence of this kind is that people we've never heard of are going to emerge to the top. If you look back at real revolutionary situations, usually the people who were picked as the revolutionary leaders in advance get pushed aside, and that people in the streets come up with their own leaders over time, and those people become the dominant players as the revolution proceeds.
There's also a revolution outside of Kazakhstan that were either pushed out or left themselves on self-exile.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
There are also Kazakhstan opposition leaders that are outside of the countries in
Right.
self-exile.
And some of them will probably try to go back, but my guess is that just like is the case with the people inside that we might think would have a chance of being the leaders of the revolution, they won't matter as much as the people who emerge from the popular uprising itself. It is always a shock to people that revolutions are made by people, and that yes, they have leaders, but the leaders that emerge in the course of them are typically different than the leaders that everyone thought would be in charge beforehand. That was true in the Russian Revolution in 1917. It was true in the Maidan in Ukraine. It's true, I believe, in Kazakhstan right now.
How about the future of Nazarbayev? There are talks that a private jet of Putin has landed in Kazakhstan, apparently to come to rescue of Nazarbayev.
Well, I have no doubt that Nazarbayev is thinking about leaving the country. Whether all the members of his family can leave the country is another matter. And I think that going out away is something, given the occupation of the presidential palace, given the attacks on government buildings that we've seen in the last 48 hours, that makes good sense. And I'm sure that Tokayev is encouraging that, because if Nazarbayev is not physically present anymore, Tokayev has a much freer hand to try to restructure the government. The problem, of course, is if Moscow, in fact, has sent a plane to take Nazarbayev out, and Nazarbayev leaves that way, Moscow is reinforcing the image of itself as a power that will try to defend its favorite dictators, no matter where they are, and will take them out and provide them with protection, something that may win support from those people to whatever the Russian leadership wants, but will have the simultaneous consequence of further alienating the population. My own guess is that Russia will probably lose more in Kazakhstan by taking Nazarbayev out than by allowing somebody else to do it. But I don't think that's how Vladimir Putin would calculate. I think he's thinking much too short term in this case, and that what he wants to show is that we take care of people who worked with us, and we don't really like the people in the streets anyway. So he's not thinking about the fact that if Nazarbayev leaves on a Russian plane, Russia bears responsibility for Nazarbayev's departure and protection. And that isn't going to sit well with people who are currently in the streets of Almaty and Nur-Sultan and other Kazakh cities.
Now, on December 29th, at the unofficial CIA summit in St. Petersburg in Russia, both Tokayev and Nazarbayev were present as representatives of Kazakhstan. How do you interpret that?
Well, what we've seen over the last several years is a slow motion change of ruler. That Nazarbayev tried to orchestrate this selected Tokayev. Nazarbayev felt that Tokayev was his man, but somebody who was a new face, and that Nazarbayev would keep his hands on some elements of control, but it would gradually pass to Tokayev. I think that in the best circumstances, for Tokayev at least, this is simply going to accelerate that process and going to mean that Tokayev is going to be the one-man ruler of Kazakhstan relatively soon. My own guess is he won't be able to stop the people in the streets as effectively in the medium and longer term, and that he will be threatened. But Nazarbayev thought he could do this dual power arrangement where he would be responsible for some things and Tokayev would be responsible for other things, and that gradually these would shift from Nazarbayev to Tokayev. That may now just be accelerated. But one of the things that's probably the most important consequence of what's happening is that the experience of Tokayev and Nazarbayev almost certainly guarantees that Vladimir Putin will never leave office except in a casket, that he's not going to be willing to go anywhere and try to share power with someone else. Because what's happening in Kazakhstan shows that if there are two people, support will be divided, and it could happen that if there is protest in the streets, the old president gets pushed out and pushed out hard and is threatened and has to be evacuated somewhere. The question one has to ask is, where would Vladimir Putin go? North Korea? Iran? Where? And I'm sure that Putin has no desire to go to any of those places, and therefore he's going to resist even more than he has up to now any suggestion for power sharing as a transition arrangement. That opens the door to a much more complicated and dangerous political transition in the Russian Federation than was true 5 days ago, before these demonstrations started in Kazakhstan.
You said that the events in Kazakhstan are gonna also influence the future actions by Russia. Did you mean in confrontation with the over Ukraine, with NATO, with United States?
I think that yes. I think that the what's happening in Kazakhstan is going to affect Russian policy in lots of places. We could talk about Central Asia. We could talk about Afghanistan. We could talk about China. All those those areas are going to be affected. But clearly, the most immediate concern is the Russian threat of further aggression against Ukraine. I think that Kazakhstan has the potential to do one of two things. And right now, we're not far enough along to know which of these vectors policy is going to change. On the one hand, it's entirely possible that Vladimir Putin will decide that the events in Kazakhstan are distracting the attention of the West, dividing opinion, raising questions about security and safety, and that's a perfect time for him to use military force to take a larger part of Ukraine under Russian control. I think that's one possibility. The other possibility, of course, is that if Vladimir Putin decides that it's necessary to introduce Russian forces in Kazakhstan, or simply is concerned that what's happening in Kazakhstan could spread not only across Central Asia, but into parts of the Russian Federation, the last thing he may want to do is to send troops into Ukraine just now, because to do so would spark opposition within Russia. There's lots of evidence that the Russian people are not thrilled about the idea of sending their troops into Ukraine. There's no possibility of a Crimea benefit the way there was in 2014. There's nothing he's going to take that's going to lead Russians to turn around and support him. And that if he sees evidence of what can happen in Kazakhstan when the population turns away from you, then he may decide we can wait a while. We'll wait and see. We just won't push. So I think that one has to be aware that Putin does have a fundamental choice, that Kazakhstan has changed the equation, but it may change the equation. It may make it more likely he'll go into Ukraine if he thinks the West is distracted by what's happening in Kazakhstan, or it may delay his move into Ukraine. I don't think it means that Russia is ever going to agree to pull out of Ukrainian territory and we'll have a new peaceful world. I don't think it means that the West should not take a very tough line against Moscow with respect to its assumption that it has powers over the Western Alliance, or that it can dictate what the Western Alliance does, or what the Western Alliance, other allies of the West, will choose to do about joining. That has to be rejected out of hand. And Putin needs to be told that. But he may believe that it's more important for him to seize parts of Ukraine. I think I will tell you that 5 days ago, before the events in Kazakhstan broke out, I was among those who was absolutely convinced that Moscow was going to move into Ukraine militarily and do so within the next month to 6 weeks. I think that you can only mobilize your troops so long and keep them without moving. And it seemed to me that we were very close to the time when he would order them to go forward. Now, because of what's happened in Kazakhstan, I think there will be those in the Russian capital who will be telling Putin, you should wait. Going now could be much more dangerous for you personally and for Russia than you can imagine. And so I think if the West continues to take a relatively tough line, not tough enough for some of us, but a relatively tough line, that Putin will realize that moving now in Ukraine would be a very, very bad idea for him personally. And that is, after all, what he cares about most of all.
Mr. Goble, I want to go back to the summit in Russia on December 29th, where the Tokayev, Nazarbayev took part, along with Azeri and Armenian leaders, Aliyev and Pashinyan. Nearly a week after this summit, we still don't know what was discussed behind the closed doors. The only public part of this summit was about the COVID-19, and frankly, given the Russian government's behavior with this crisis, it is really doubtful that indeed was the issue that brought together the CIS leaders under Putin's leadership. What is your take? What is it that Kremlin was discussing behind the closed doors with these leaders?
Well, I think I know what Putin's message was. I'm not sure that I know what the responses were of all the various leaders. I think Putin's message was this: look, I'm heading into very tough negotiations with the West. If the West doesn't back down, I have no choice but to move into Ukraine. And I will remember forever how you all respond to that. Anyone, any leader, any country in the CIS or in the former Soviet space more generally that isn't 100% behind the Russian position on this will suffer consequences. And that you'd better remember that in all the policy decisions you make. I'm quite sure that was Putin's message. With respect to the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, I'm very sure he told both sides to cool it. I don't want a distraction. I don't want problems there. And I'm sure he didn't expect that less than a week later, Kazakhstan would be going up in flames. That's exactly what he didn't want to happen. Didn't want a country like that, because that really puts him in a difficult position unless he can somehow use it as a smokescreen of distraction that allows him to move more quickly into Ukraine. Which, as I say, my view, because I think the Kazakh events are vastly more serious than people are thinking even now, is that he will probably wait. That this will probably mean that Putin will be willing to wait a while. That doesn't mean he's given up on taking Ukraine. I think that he has an idée fixe that his presidency depends on his reabsorption of Belarus and Ukraine. I think what Putin wants is a Russian empire, but a Slavic empire of those three former republics, which would become one country if he gets his way. I really don't think he wants the entire Soviet Union back, because having the entire Soviet Union back would recreate all the problems which led to the Soviet Union exploding in the first place 30 years ago, and it would happen faster and more violently than was the case in 1991. But he really does want the two other Slavic countries, Belarus and Ukraine, to be part of a Russian superstate. And I don't think he's going to give up on that, but I think he can be dissuaded about pursuing it as directly. And if the West can do that, then we will all be better off, and we won't have to deal with the discussion of a further Russian invasion of Ukraine all the way to Odessa, which is what would otherwise be the case.
Now, about the red lines of Putin, and that the West and the NATO and United States have to deal with Russia if they want to have any military expansion with Ukraine. Do you think that there is something that countries like Azerbaijan also should be worried about this, that it's not just future of Ukraine is decided at these talks, but also future of...
Absolutely. The notion that Russia should have a droit de regard, that Russia should have a veto, if you will, over what all the countries of the former Soviet space do, should be something that every one of them should be worried about. The whole point of the international order is that each country, within the rules of the international state system, gets to make its own choices, that no country dictates to others. The Russians believe, however, that the United States has created a neo-imperial arrangement in which it dictates to other countries, and therefore the Russians want to have the same thing themselves. They believe that they should be allowed to determine what Azerbaijan or Armenia or Ukraine or Belarus, or even now we see Putin talking about the three Baltic countries, which I find positively perverse under the circumstances, but nonetheless, that Moscow should have a say. The whole point has been, since '91, that all these countries should be allowed to make their own choice. If I were the leader of Uzbekistan or Azerbaijan or Belarus, I would be very, very worried about any indication that the West was going to defer to Moscow on anything that would constitute a veto over what the West does in agreement with Ukraine, because it would then mean that their freedom of action would be profoundly compromised. So what should happen is that the other former Soviet republics, now independent countries in their own right, should be on the side of the Western powers in this regard, not on Moscow's side. And that's why I think Vladimir Putin delivered a very tough message to them on December 28th, saying, don't think about doing that, because we will punish you. But threats have a way of proving counterproductive, and Mr. Putin's threats often have been counterproductive, and I think this one will be too.
Mr. Paul Goble, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.